we're probably at least 40 yards away, up on in the parking lot part of the range. I see guys loading magazines. I don't know who they are. They don't have a clue who I am, of course. I'm talking to one of my really close friends down at the academy, and all of a sudden they're okay, we're going hot. Which again, I've been on the range for 20 years at this point almost. So this is not something new for me. And I hear that, I'm like, okay, we're so far away, I don't even need ear protection at this point. And that first shot goes off, and I jumped about 8 feet and just turned ghost white. And
Mm.
my buddy saw that, and he's like, hey, and he put both his hands on my shoulders. He's like, hey, man, you good? Yeah, man, no, whatever, get out of here, I'm fine. Blow it off like we do. And that was the first time I realized that I was not okay.
Hey everyone, this is Christina Deffenbaugh with 1042 Project, and welcome to episode 14 of the Shared Voices podcast. We are back with part 3 of our interview with Chris Hoyer, retired Phoenix police officer. And just to kind of catch you up, at part 1 and 2 of Chris's interview, we went through some childhood experiences and his story and how he got into law enforcement and some of the calls that happened fairly early on in his career. And in this episode, we're going to be talking about a call that really changed the trajectory of Chris's life. So I do want to be sure to include a trigger warning. There will be some difficult and graphic content in this episode. So if you're in a place where it would not be best for you to hear that kind of discussion, I just ask that you give yourself some grace and not listen to it at this time, or make sure that you're with a safe and trusted person while you listen. So thank you for joining us. We appreciate it.
Yes, thank you. And Chris, thank you for being on again.
Yes, thank you.
I
Are you
know
kidding?
we've
I'm down, you guys. I love you guys. Thank you.
I know we've taken up a lot of your time already, but this probably still won't be the last episode if that's okay with you.
Absolutely, of course.
Well, good. I'm glad San Diego doing good for you out there.
Yeah, it's been crazy sunny, which is good because it was rainy and cold for a little while there, which is really strange coming from Phoenix when it's 150 to you know 62. It's like what? I don't know what to do with this. So
So here you are. You're in here just working hard on a podcast. And again, where's Natalie?
she's at the beach writing love notes. Yes.
Had a girl.
That's awesome. Natalie is a woman of great judgment. I can tell right now.
Well, it's like less time with me, more time with the beach. Yeah, you can see the balance there. It works pretty well for her. So
Heck yeah, man. That's quiet times on the beach is where you can really just relax and find God and just
Just chill.
chill.
Yeah.
and she
We're
does
look
believe she does. So
we're looking forward to coming out and visiting you guys here soon. We
can't
can
wait.
get out of Iowa for a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Open
the
door,
nice
man.
weather
Like I
you
said,
speak of. I could use
say
some of
again?
that. I said the nice weather you speak of. I could use some of that.
It's rough. I'm not gonna lie. I think it averages like 65 a year all the time. It's like it gets up in the 70s. We're hot. And gets down into the upper 50s and we're freezing. So that 64, 65 mark is
It's a
pretty
delicate
optimal.
balance.
And Chris, we were talking before we started recording. Obviously, we already know this, but
Yeah.
maybe our speakers don't know this, our listeners don't know this. You travel around and you also give a presentation and kind of talk about your story and to help empower other people. Is that correct?
I do. Yeah. I've got a presentation I've created over the years, probably since about mid 2017 ish, maybe a little bit earlier. And the whole purpose is just to make people aware of not only just critical incidents in general, but surviving a career and surviving life, surviving retirement, all these kinds of things. And um, it's been extremely fulfilling, and I've gotten a tremendous amount of really good feedback on the whole thing, which is just great. So I just want to keep on moving forward. So I'll go anywhere too, by the way. So
And another thing that was cool is we learned. I always see that flag behind you,
Mm.
and I always think it's cool, but I didn't know the story of it. So you've been doing this for a while. You've been traveling around. You've been talking. You've been to a lot of different places. You want to explain a little bit what that flag is and how many you got?
yeah, so this is actually my third. Actually, it's my first of three, I should say. And this one actually started in Virginia back in around 2020. I got to say, I can't even remember, to be honest with you. Decided because I sell the books as well. Had the books out on display, brought the flag and a whole bunch of markers, and I thought it would just be kind of neat to have folks from around the country from different agencies. And it's not limited to just law enforcement. I mean, it's veterans, firefighters, dispatchers, anybody that's in our community, so to speak. Um, I say, hey, just write something on there that's meaningful to you. Put your name and your agency, your serial number, your badge number, whatever happens to be. And the thing, I mean, if you can see it, it's probably doesn't have an inch of square space left on it because I've got so many signatures. And so pretty much every time I travel, no matter where it is, I bring it with me. And if it gets utilized, cool. If it doesn't, I know at some point I'm gonna have a whole room full of them. So
What I love about that is, like, so a lot of times in life you do things and you just go through your day and day and you do, like, you're doing these positive things, you're traveling, and sometimes we don't have anything to remind us of those memories. I think it's
Yeah.
smart that you brought that and you're letting people write on it, and man, that's something you're gonna have. I mean, look at that already. You have to look at that flag and go, I've done some things. I've met a few
Mhm.
people, I've traveled a few places, and you got 3 of those bad boys. I just think that's so cool that you're it's kind of a way of documenting what you're doing, because a lot of times we get so busy, we forget some of the awesome, rewarding stuff we get to do and some of the lives we get to change, and doing
Mhm.
something like that is just, what a cool memory and what an awesome thing to be able to pass on to somebody later. Is how cool is that?
it's super neat. Every once in a while, I'll just stop and read some stuff on there and that I've forgotten about, or I have a friend, from Arizona or wherever across the country, and I'm like, oh man, I forgot about Ron. I needed to call him. I'll look at the flag and I'm like, oh yeah, so I send him a message really quick and just make that connection or reconnection, and it's super
That's
neat. There's a lot of heartfelt stuff that's written on there as well, and it's a constant reminder, just like you said, of what we do and what I'm trying to do now, and just save as many as I can. So.
Yes, especially on the days where I know for us where we have hard days, and just be real, some days you wanna quit.
Mhm.
Having something like that to look at, you can look at that and say, "Jesus, thank you. You have
Yeah,
done more than I ever could have imagined. I
Mhm.
never could have sought to do all this, but yet with your guidance, I did it." And you have it hanging on your wall, and you got other ones. I just think that's neat.
Yeah, a good physical reminder.
it is big time. Eventually, I'm searching for a true red, white, and blue style, the Betsy Ross, the original, like the cloth style one. And I found one in Massachusetts, and she's kind of hanging on to it with both hands, going, "Ah, I just don't know if I can get rid of this thing." But that one, of course, this one, yes, it's a huge symbol of the American people and everything else. And because it's not a traditional red, white, and blue flag, I don't feel like I'm desecrating it by having people sign it.
Right.
Mhm.
However, the red, white, and blue and the traditional one, that's going to be pristine. It's going to be kept in its original form. And eventually it's going to be a collage of some sort. I'm not quite sure what it's going to be yet. It's just going to be a whole bunch of just different flags around the room or whatever. So
That's cool. Well, if anybody's listening, you have one of those flags or you wanna buy Chris one,
yeah.
let us know. We'll give you his address so you can send it to him.
Yeah, I'll pay for it. I don't mind paying for it. I gotta find one. That's the hardest part, is finding one. And I want it to be, so this one's, your typical kind of vinyl-ish, whatever material. I want an old style, original cloth style one. I've only been able to find one so far.
Yeah.
But I know
Wow.
they're out there. I know they're crazy expensive, but yeah, that's what it is. So be it.
So you don't want the little cheap little American flag that says "Made in China" on it?
No, no, I
Yeah,
want something. I want something authentic. So
I hear you, brother.
Yeah.
I hear you. All right, we'll go ahead and jump in here. Sorry, I just wanted to. We talked about some things before we started recording, and I just thought it was cool. I wanted to share it.
Yeah, no, that was a good idea.
God's just moving in your life, and when I saw that and you explained it, it's just like
So cool.
it's a testament. It's a
Yeah.
testimony. So cool.
yeah, it's huge. I love it. It's so neat, to be able to carry it around, and people that pull it out and they're like, "What do you got going on there?" And I explain what it is, and they're like, "Oh man!" I'm like, "You want to get on there?" And people are like lining up to sign this thing, and I'm like, "Okay." I mean, yeah, it's neat, but it's not like you go into a Metallica concert or something. So
Right. And hey, real quick before we jump into this, as far as your public speaking and you going around doing that, is there a way somebody can contact you, if they want you to come speak? I don't know if you have a website or an email you want to give. If not, we can put a link or whatever, however you want to do it.
yeah, I've got the website. It's up and running, but it's not completely built. Still in construction. So I mean, it is a way to make contact with me. It's not the greatest way. You're welcome to put my email up there. It's out to the entire world, pretty much, literally,
Okay.
no kidding. So, if you want to put it in the link, or I can just say it now, or however, whatever's best for you guys. And yeah,
If you want to say it, we'll link it in, and we'll
Yeah, we
put
can
it in
do
the link as
both.
well.
yeah, super easy. It's just my first and last name, Chris Hoyer 46 at Gmail. That's it. Super easy. So.
There you go.
Perfect.
So if there's somebody who's listening and you want to invite Chris to come speak to your organization or your department, get a hold of Chris, and he's a gracious person, and I'm sure if he has time, he will make time to come and provide that talk for your team.
Yeah.
I've got a whole kind of a like a speech, like a boilerplate that I send out for folks explaining what it is that they're going to get from me. Some tangible stuff like the book, and of course, some swag stuff like that. But the primary basis, of course, is learning about survival on multiple different levels. Like we talked about earlier, it's like surviving critical incidents, surviving a marriage, surviving a divorce, um, surviving retirement, or just a life in general, whatever it is. It is based around critical incidents. That's because that's my history, if you will. But I do branch off into several other topics as well that are all relatable and very user friendly, if you will. People will walk away with something going, yeah, that makes sense, yeah, or they say it makes sense, but I don't like what you do. I'm going to go this other direction, which is okay too. So
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely, please do, yeah, yeah. As long as
That
I
was
get you
awesome.
thinking about something that's going to push you in a positive direction, whether you take my advice or you just say, yeah, I like that, but I'm 100% okay with that too. So
And that's how we are too. It's
Mhm.
it's when I first started doing this, Chris, I would always get worried about what I would say because I didn't want to upset anybody. But I've learned over time that no matter what you say, you're going to upset somebody.
pretty much.
But I just learned that, God puts it on our heart. We're going to say it, and how people receive it is up to them. We can only say it the way we were told to say it, and say what we felt right in our heart. And if people perceive it wrong, that's a them issue. Um,
And growth can still come
e-
from that.
exactly, and growth can still come from that.
Mhm.
Good
Absolutely.
point. Thank you for that. Yes,
Yeah.
you say it
And
much better than I do. So
yeah. So in the last couple episodes, we talked about three of the shootings that you have been in.
yes,
Um, So as we dive into this, and like Christina said, for those listening, we're going to talk about something pretty heavy here for just a little bit, but we have to because it's reality,
Mhm.
and I think it's important for our listeners to hear from somebody who's gone through it and somebody who's still with us today. So many times people have gone through stuff like Chris has gone through, and they end up taking their own life or end up in a very bad mental place. But Chris is still with us; he's thriving,
Mhm.
and so as we go into this one, Chris, this if this is just me saying these are my words, this is, in my opinion, probably the call that changed your life. I would say they all probably did, but this was the big call that changed Chris Hoyer. Is that correct?
not only changed my life, it changed the trajectory of my life. I like to say so.
Okay. And so if you don't mind, Chris was involved in a another very serious shooting. And Chris, do you want to kind of just walk us through that as much as you feel comfortable with? Kind of what happened that day and what you went through and kind of what you had to deal with the aftermath.
Absolutely, yeah. And if I get going off too long, just stop me in the middle. Just throw something at the screen or whatever. And, 'cause
You're fine.
You're good.
as you guys now know, I do have a tendency just to run on a little bit. So
I'll
um,
make a train noise like last time if
exactly.
just kidding.
um, So yeah, so I had 18 years on at the time with Phoenix, and I was still having the time of my life. I was out there chasing bad guys, still on the neighborhood enforcement team, which I got on in '02. So at that time, um, I had 18 years on, but I had 14 years on the net squad. So wasn't anything new for me. This particular call, which was a basically like it came out kind of like a check welfare, if you will. The dad called, and when we started getting more into the call itself, we found out that it was actually a burglary. So backstory to that part. So the 20-year-old son had gotten kicked out of the house, and he came back and he borrowed mom's minivan and just never brought it back. But because that was more of a civil matter, my agency, when the family called 911 to report the van stolen, they said, well, he's had access to it before. It kind of fits that profile of being a civil matter, so they didn't take a report on the stolen. Which, yeah, okay, whatever. I mean, that really wouldn't have changed the dynamic, unfortunately. But um, so basically, what happens is the son shows up at the house, knowing nobody's home, kicks in the front door, gets into dad's safe, and takes his 9mm handgun out of the safe, and sends a picture to the dad with a selfie with a meth pipe in his mouth and a gun to his head, and basically saying, I want, and literally on the 911 call, which I show in my presentation, or I let people listen to in my presentation. He wants to have a shootout with the cops. the dad explaining this whole thing. You hear him talking. You don't hear the son. You hear the dad talking on 911. Basically, what happens is the kid is 20 years old. He's been never been arrested for anything except for shoplifting, and he's suicidal, high on two different types of methamphetamine and weed, as it turns out. And obviously, he's armed, and now he's making threats against law enforcement. It's like, well, the first four or five, we're kind of still at a stalemate on some level. I've talked to several people, particularly on the West Coast, that say they wouldn't even respond to that call. I said, yeah, but here's the liability part where you make a threat against law enforcement, and his exact words were, he wants to have a shootout with the cops, and he doesn't give a bleep, right? Like, okay, so now it's one of those things where well, you guys knew about this and you didn't do anything about it, and he went off and he shot up a bunch of people, or we do go and then we get into a situation that's you know not more than we can handle, but more than we expected. So that's the basis of the original call. Call comes out uh, about a little bit after 2 o'clock on a Wednesday afternoon. This is May 18th, 2016, and of course I do remember all the dates and times for the big ones like this one. So earlier that day, I happened to be out on patrol. We made a traffic stop on this kid. I could have arrested him for the marijuana that he had. Call it laziness, call it a premonition, call it whatever. I decided not to take the kid to jail that particular day and just let him go on his way. Fast forward, I'm at the station. It's now pushing 2:30. I'm on the computer and I'm impounding this kid's weed, and call comes out over the radio. I never even heard the original first burglary call come out. Um, I wasn't even paying attention to it. I'm like, okay, it's out of my area, so it really wasn't a big thing for me. So our lieutenant gets on our chase channel or our emergency traffic channel and says, "Hey, I need a scout to come down here to check out this house." And my exact words were, "Oh, cool, it's 2:30. I still got time to get into something." "Uh, okay, all right." So, and that's how I was. I mean, even at 18 years on, at the end of my shift, I got off at 4 o'clock. I still got 90 minutes to go play. I'm like, yeah, let's go. Let's rock and roll. Hop in a hot rod and I go flying down there. And I get worried that they're going to just handle this call before I get there. It's about a 15 or 20-minute drive to get down to this area. And I'm driving an unmarked car because that's part of the detail that I was on. We drove basically, they're not undercover cars, but they're plain clothes cars. They're not they're not like your unmarked Crown Vics where you can tell they're cop cars. I mean, I actually drove a Jeep Wrangler, which was pretty cool. So nobody in the world could have known it was a cop car. So I'm worried because I don't have an opportunity to run code or bust lights or anything like that. I basically just got to follow the regular flow of traffic. I'm like, come on. So I get down there, and in the meantime, of course, I'm on the radio. I'm asking for intel. I'm like, hey, what do we know? And they don't have much of anything to tell me. Like, we got the kid. Here's his name. He's 20 years old. Um, Last seen calling the dad from the house. Mm, okay, key in on that part right there. So that's a hugely important part of the story. All right. So I go down there and I come on scene. I'm like, hey, I'm here. I've got a minivan in the driveway, parked facing eastbound. I don't see anything else. The bad part was that I didn't know that the kid had kicked in the front door of the house. That part hadn't been broadcast to me, so I wasn't aware of that. But I did look at the front door from where I could see, but there was a palm tree blocking the main part of the door, so I couldn't see that it had been kicked in. And again, would that really have changed the dynamic? Probably not a whole lot because everybody else knew what it was. Okay, fine. But since I started late, clearly I started almost 15 or 20 minutes into the call. The information that I needed was already being broadcast before, and there really wasn't much time for me to get all that information back. If that makes sense. So
Yeah,
it's more
so you're not pulling in the driveway or anything like that. You're kind of sitting back from a distance watching, is that correct?
exactly right. So
Okay.
basically, what I do is I drive by, put out the plate information on the radio, I drive down about 100 yards, flip a U-turn, and come back, and I'm probably about I'd say about five houses to the south on the west side of the street. So if you can picture, I'm looking like northeast toward the house. Plain clothes, I'm gearing up. I got all my cool tack gear on. I'm putting on my heavy vest, my rifle, Kevlar helmet, earpiece, gloves. Got to have my cool shades on, because that's what we do. Um, So I'm out there watching this house, and I went back later and listened to all the audio, listened to everything I could get my hands on to try to put it all back together later on down the road. And what I figured out was I was out there watching that house alone for 13 minutes. Like, okay, and this was a call that I had been on 100 times. This was nothing new for me. I do this every single day. This is what you guys literally called me to come do. I've been doing the Net Squad job for 14 years at that point. I know my stuff. I know what I'm doing. Except that, Murphy likes to step in sometimes and just kick us in the butt. And that's exactly what happened. So um, I'm putting out information on the radio. Okay, what do you got? Well, I got a van in the driveway. And for a guy like me, as you guys very well know, I can talk. Even on the radio, even though I try to keep it short, I can still talk. And there's nothing. I have nothing. Like, there's no foot traffic. There's no vehicle traffic there. And it's like, it's pushing 3 o'clock now and there's nobody around. There's no kids walking up and down the street. It's a weekday and we hadn't blocked off the streets yet. And it was just kind of looking back on it was very eerie. I'm like, because this is kind of a pass through street as well. It's not a main drag by any stretch, but a lot of people use that street to get to the other parts of the neighborhood. So it's very strange. I'm going, okay, yeah, whatever. So the last bit of intel I put out, I'm like, hey, okay, nothing going on. If you guys want to start your roll, come on in. Again, sergeant gets on the radio. How are we going to start the rally? So when they do, I pull up pretty much 2 houses away. But I walked out, paced it off later about 35 yards away. Okay. So I'm parked kind of facing northwest, but I'm looking to the northeast, if you will, just barely. And 2 patrol cars pass me, and they block the street to my south. 2 more cars come up and they block the street to the north, and then 2 other cars park on the west side of the street, about 4 or 5 houses down from the way. So we got the entire thing pretty much locked down in the front. I find out later on that 2 other patrol cars have gone around the back of the neighborhood, and now we're in the rear of the house as well. And a very, very good friend of mine was actually on the rooftop of a house just northeast of our target location. We had to sing 100% lockdown. Okay, so in the meantime, while I'm setting up on my intel and everything else, the sergeant gets on the radio asking for our SWAT guys. Hey, we got a potential shooter here. We don't know what this guy's deal is. We know he's armed. We know what's to have a shootout with the cops. What do you guys want to do? Oh, we're the academy. We're about 12 miles away. Let us know when you need us. Okay. SWAT team on standby now. All right, cool. That's standard protocol. Call for a helicopter, probably about 15 minutes away. And we did call for a canine as well, probably about 20 minutes away. So, how long do we give this guy before we got to start making a move, right? Time, we get it drilled into our heads. And I know you know this, Dan. We get it drilled in our heads that time's on our side. Well, that's not always the case. When you got a kid that's suicidal, that's on dope, that's planning a shootout with the cops, maybe we need to step up to the mic a little bit quicker than we normally would. So we had a plan in place. The idea was what we're going to do is we're going to get out there. We're going to do a surround and call out. We're just going to block in the van, bring them to our battleground, get on the PA. Hey, whatever your name is, Phoenix Police, come on out here. We're going to whatever. And it just didn't turn out to happen that way. So those 2 patrol cars that parked on the west side of the street, Dave Glasser and his partner Ryan happened to be the third car of that conga line, and he sees that people are blocking streets all over, and he's like, "Well, where's my best position that I can go?" So he decides to block in the van, which I thought was a perfectly sound tactic because do we want a rolling gunfight? Well, no, we don't know where the guy's at, but we don't want to have him getting access to that van and taking off and cranking off rounds, driving down the street at us and everybody else. So he made that impromptu decision, which was a last second decision. And I did have one comment about that. Of all the times I've told the story about, well, why did he come in from the other side? Well, if you look at the way the house was situated, that really wasn't a very sound tactic because now you're basically downrange of the front door of the house and a big glass window. So the way he came in was probably the best way to go. Wouldn't have mattered anyways because he would have had to come down, make a U-turn, come back around, and now even more exposed. So Dave pulls his car up just barely into the driveway, right behind the van, blocking it in. Good tactical position. And of course, as you well know, we don't have a Bearcat with us. We don't have a bear. We don't have shields. We don't have all the high speed stuff. But we do have a handful of guys with rifles and these kinds of things. Actually, there was only 2 that deployed. One myself and another guy who was a field training officer. And so When Dave pulls up, I keyed on this earlier. The guy was last seen at the house. Well, where do you think the guy was, as it turns out? Yeah, he's not inside the house. He's inside the minivan. So fast forward, the survivor's guilt. Wait a second. I'm out here for 13 minutes watching his house and I don't see the guy in the van. And I struggled with that for at least a year, probably two, until my boss finally, my different boss of mine, pointed out. He goes, "Okay, let's say you did see the guy in the van. Would that change your tactics?" Well, probably not. You're gonna walk up to the van, yourself. No, the guy's gonna probably shoot you in the face if you do that. But again, we still can't let this guy just go mobile. So yeah, we're still gonna probably block in the van. Okay, and he pretty much allowed me to release that guilt from myself, which I still have some lingering. I'm not gonna lie. So
Yeah.
only because things went bad, of course. If things hadn't gone bad, I wouldn't be having this conversation. So Dave pulls up in the driveway, and the very last thing he ever said, he goes, "Oh man, I think the guy's in the front seat." And they both disembark. Dave's a big kid; he was about 6'5", and he's got to literally turn his body to get out of the car. Well, basically, knucklehead in the driver's seat of the van opens the door, reaches back, and starts firing rounds off at David. First round went through his door and caught him below the knee, and of course, instinctively he crouches down and starts trying to move back behind his car for cover. Guy fires the second round. Even it was all like consecutive shots, one, two, three, right in a row. Second shot goes past Dave's car into another Tahoe, as it turned out, across the street from the house. Very strange, almost the exact same bullet hole in the door of two separate patrol cars. One that was 20 yards away. It was very strange. Third round catches Dave's door on his A pillar, and probably about a 16th of an inch that he caught just a little tiny corner of that door. And then when it hit that door, it basically reflected off and caught Dave right in the back of the head and killed him right on the spot. And the worst part was, of course, we lose the officer, but the good part was that Dave never even knew it hit him. I mean, he was dead before he hit the ground, and I hate even saying it that way, but it's a fact. That was one of my biggest fears, is getting shot and then suffering. It's like
Yeah.
Dave never suffered, so thank God for that. So,
Yep.
uh, so clearly, you can imagine what happens is gunfire starts to erupt. Now, if you take a step back, right when Dave pulls up into the driveway, I decide now is the time for me to get out of my car. Now it's no secret that we're here. So now my cover's been blown on some level, if you will. So I get out of my car, and instead of going toward the front where I've got better cover, I go around to the back of the Jeep and out into the middle of the street. And I probably did my presentation about 20 or 30 times before I finally had somebody answer the question that I couldn't answer. Like, why would I go around the back and expose myself versus going to the front where I've got better cover? And the simplest answer I ever heard, the best one, was path of least resistance. You're going to have an opportunity to just slip out the door, go around the back, get up on your position of cover, because that's your position that you need to cover anyways, on the right side of that house. I'm like, oh, makes sense, because for the longest time I couldn't figure out, you know, what happened, why I did what I did, what I couldn't remember, all these other kind of weird things. So I get around the back of the Jeep, and I come up, and I'm pointing toward the right side of the house. That's my area of responsibility. And I'm basically covering from the main window over to the front door, and everybody else on the other side's got the other side of the house, right? So we've got 270-degree coverage around the front of the house. We got a plan in place. And of course, it just goes bad when bad guy opens the door, shoots, kills Dave. Gunfire erupts, and we've got guys from 35 yards away to the north, and guys to the rear, and then myself. I was the only guy that fired from the passenger side of the van, which was parked in the driveway. I come up for that first volley of rounds, and I estimate somewhere between 7 to 10 rounds of rifle into the middle window of this van. And side note to my history, 3 other shootings, and I'm a rifle instructor, tactics instructor, all these kinds of things. I teach this stuff on the range. The very first thing I do as soon as I get done shooting is what? What do you think I do? Come off target, right?
Yeah.
So I know better than to come off target. I know that I need to stay on, do that follow through, because I teach this. I know these things. But it was one of those things where my brain is working faster than my fingers. My brain is going, hey, don't worry about it. You put 10 rounds in this guy, he's done. Don't worry about it. Yeah, no, that's not what happened. So bang, 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 bang. come off target, and then immediately the guy reaches out that same window I just fired through and puts 3 rounds downrange against me. And I'm like,
Mm.
whoa, hey, you guys can talk about this in the brochure. So, you know, and as dumb as it sounds, I know, because I'm a tactical instructor. I do all these things and all this greatness and whatever else. I didn't know the difference between a shooting and a gunfight, because every
Mm.
other time it was like the target turns, I raise and fire 2 rounds, and then I wait for the pizzas. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Same kind of a concept here. I come up, put those rounds down range, and I figure, okay, now I'm done. Now I'm just going to stand by. It's going to be a long day. It's going to be a whole lot longer day now that the guy fires those rounds so close to my head. I could feel the pressure and I could hear him going past my head.
Wow.
I later went back and checked my helmet to make sure I wasn't struck, because that's how close they were. I was like, holy cow, what? I don't like this anymore.
Do you know at this point that David is dead?
I had no idea. Thank God I didn't see that happen.
Okay.
Even though it did happen right in front of me. And I know that I saw part of it because Dave's so tall. He's taller than the Tahoe. And I could see through the windows, but I know my brain is blocking that out.
Yep.
Mm.
So sometimes when I explain that portion of it, I do explain that, yes, it happened right in front of me, but I didn't really actually, I don't remember seeing it, but I know that I did.
Yeah.
Uh, but I don't know the dynamic, because my brain is still saying, hey, we got trouble downrange. We need to handle that now, kind of a thing. So I come back up on target, and I move. I do this one step across the street, like a big matrix move, right? And come back up, and I'm not gonna say my exact words, but I'm like, oh, you want to play? I can play. And I came back up, and the dynamic tactical part of this, the second part of this whole thing, was that your fingers are switched to roll. Now your fingers are working faster than your brain, because now you're in a critical incident. Now you need to survive. You need to get through this thing as quickly as you can. Which is, if you ever notice, a lot of times with gunfights, you'll see guys shooting the ground and they're climbing as they're making their way up to their target. I did the exact same thing, because I was shooting before I was actually on target, which actually worked out pretty good, as it turns out, because I put 6 rounds into his door, and actually 5 were just in almost a perfectly straight line right up the door, and then one off to the side to the right. And what I figured out from that was, when I started walking forward, my barrel for my rifle obviously got off canter, sent that one little flyer off to the side. Okay. People ask me all the time, like, dude, why would you start walking toward a guy that's trying to kill you? I'm like, well, he's either going to kill me or I'm going to kill him. And it sounds really bad to say it that way, but when you're in a fight or flight or freeze, it's like, okay, well, I don't feel like getting shot today, so I'm going to make sure this guy can't do anything else to hurt me or anybody else. So
You
Yeah.
came
become a
back.
warrior. You become a warrior in that moment.
Yeah, I mean, I hate even saying it out loud. But I did train for this on multiple levels, and I did have a couple of failures. I'm going to talk about that as we go. The first one, of course, coming off target, was one of the big ones. Um, but it is that warrior mindset of like, I'm going home. That's just it, And later on, if you guys want to, after the show, I'll share some pictures with you guys of what it looked like.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I do show that stuff in my presentation as well. It's not for shock value. It's a training tool that, hey, it doesn't have to be a gunfight that you might see somebody that gets mangled. Could be a car accident, but I want people to learn it here, just like we're doing right now. I want you guys to learn it here in a controlled environment before you see it in real life out on the street.
Yep.
Because when you see it in real life, it's very shocking, oftentimes, especially when it's at your hand. You know what I mean? Even though it's a very, very, very important tip that people have to understand. I didn't make this decision. He made the decision. I simply responded to it. So I take
Absolutely.
no responsibility for putting 22 rounds of rifle into this guy. I'm like, dude,
Right.
So, and I
Mhm.
never had any nightmares. I've had some dreams. I've never had any nightmares about having to basically kill somebody with like extreme violence. I mean, pretty. I mean, you don't put 22 rounds down range without some violence happening there. And that was just me by myself. Total between the other 5 operators that were out there, we put 71 rounds into this guy. And it's like, oh my god. I mean, you look at it from that standpoint, it does look really bad from the media side. But then you figure out that he tried to kill 3 or 4 guys that were behind me. He did kill Dave. He was shooting at the other guys that were around Dave. What do you expect us to do? I mean, this
Right.
whole thing lasted
Mhm.
about 4 seconds. I mean, literally.
Yeah.
So come back up, send that second volley of rounds downrange, and then I very quickly realized that I'm in no man's land. Both of my 2 volleys of fire from approximately 35 yards away. which with the AR-15 is, I mean, it's like it's cheating. I mean, it's like, dude, I can't even really miss from this point almost. Um, and so I make the decision that, well, I can't stand here I'm at. I've got literally no cover at all where I'm at. So I make the decision to move over to Dave's car. And now what I've learned after the fact is now they have extricated Dave across the street to the west side. They're working on him over there. Okay. So I move up to Ryan's door, Dave's partner, and I get up there, I roll down the window, the door's already open. I'm trying to look into the back of the minivan, which is now just completely shattered with glass and everything else. And I can't really see what I need to see. And in my heart, I'm pretty well convinced that this guy's dead, but I'm not gonna just walk up to this guy's van and just be like, "Hey, dude, do a dead check on him right there." I got to make sure from a distance that he's good to go, which I couldn't do. Ugh. So now, um, this is where my anxiety starts to kick in a little bit because now I've got to think. I mean, before it was real easy because now it's just a reaction. Now I've got to actually think, and I'm like, wait a second, okay, what would this guy do or what would that guy do? Kind of all playing these out in my mind. Go around the back of Dave's Tahoe, and now they've got another Tahoe that's now moved up a little bit closer to the scene, if you will. And the sergeant running the scene, Joe, is a good, very close friend of mine now, especially after surviving this thing. Um, he's trying to get out on the radio, which has now completely shut down for 2 solid minutes, dead air for 2 minutes. And when I went back and listened to that, because I know what's coming, and I got all this anxiety when I'm listening to it for the first time, and then it just goes dead for 2 solid minutes, and it was like, I mean, I'm getting chills just talking about it now. It was so strange. We never did figure out why. Motorola's, the biggest thing is that they think it probably was because so many people locked onto that one radio tower and just locked it all up.
Yep.
Oh, wow.
But neither here nor there. I mean, I had no idea what was going on. I mean, I didn't hear any of the shots go off. I didn't hear anything on the radio. I heard nothing going on except for what my brain needed to know, which is needed to just take care of this dude. So I see Joe, and he's very angry, of course, because Dave was standing about 10 feet in front of him when this whole thing happened. He saw Dave go down. Talks about that in great detail. That Dave, even though it wasn't one of his officers, was his kid for that particular call. So he feels incredibly responsible that Dave was killed during this whole thing. Is like, oh my god. So he's got his own set of survivor's guilt as well. So I see Joe, and he breaks off to whatever, and I go around to Dave's door and come back up for that second view that I need to see this guy. And now I can see even less than I could from the passenger side. I'm going, oh, this is not good. This is where I credit my hero Dave Grossman for helping save my life on so many of these major things. All right, start breathing, because I recognize it, man. I'm so wound up, I can't even think straight. Okay, take a deep combat breath, and then that's when I realized, hey, I fired a lot of rounds out of this gun. I should probably do a mag exchange. Boom, so I do. Good mag exchange. That ended up being mistake number 3. I'm going to go back to mistake number 2 in a minute. I took the magazine and threw it on Dave's front seat of his car instead of retaining it like I've done 1,000 times. When I'm on the range, I'll get out there fully geared up like I was that day. I trained very specifically on what I need to do. And in my credit, what I did was I decided that the best thing for me to do was to get rid of that magazine faster than to try to stow it on my body so I could get a new one in there, which was actually worked out pretty good. And actually, believe it or not, even though cops are thieves, I actually got that mag back, which I didn't expect to get. So, but I did have the number written on there. Um, so come back up for that second view, do the mag exchange, get back up there, get back in the fight, and now I get on the radio for the first time asking for help, and I'm not getting the help, and I'm getting very angry. I'm like, you guys all know me that are working out here. I'm not one of those guys that really asks for help. I just go take care of it. When things go bad, which isn't the way to do it, that's when I ask for help. So I'm up there. I'm like, hey, 825 extra. I need rifle coverage. Blah blah blah. We got this guy still in the van. Nobody's coming. I'm like, so I'm out there for a couple of minutes by myself, just trying to make an assessment of what's my next option. Luckily, somebody heard me, sent me another officer just to stand by with me and back me up. And he goes, hey, I'm with you. I go, hey, what's going on here? He goes, oh, Dave was shot. I don't know his last name, Dave G something. I go, talking about Glasser? He goes, yeah. He goes, they're working on him across the street. And then I start, I mentioned the anxiety kicking in. Now the fear starts kicking in. Now I'm like, wait a second. This is bigger than I thought it was.
Mhm.
my brain wasn't really allowing me to revert back yet to what I had just been through, but it was definitely, working like super fast, going, "Hey, dude, this isn't over yet. We need to start figuring out what the next step is." Okay, somebody please help me because I don't have a clue what that is. Um, so I told the kid behind me, Brandon, good guy. I said, "Hey, man, do me a favor, grab a Tahoe and put it in that driveway to the north." Okay. So he does. About 2 minutes later, comes back. He's like, "All right, you got it." I said, "Hey, do me a favor, cover my position because I got the long gun. I got the best firepower there. Everybody else is with Dave." So grab the rifle and go around. He covers my position while I move around, and now I'm facing due south. Throw my arms up on the hood of this Tahoe, and now I can see the guy clear as day. He's probably about 12 feet away now, ish, give or take, maybe a little bit further. And my exact words were, to myself quietly, I'm like, "Dude, turn your head, lift a finger, take a breath, and I'm going to put a round through your temple." You know, now knowing what I know, and this is only, you know, you know, 20 20 seconds into the whole thing. This is like 2 minutes after the Tahoe gets there. I'm over there. So we're talking, 4 or 5 minutes after the whole thing is pretty much said and done. Now I'm up there and I'm like, okay, just, pretty much give me a reason, right? And I talk about this and I asked the very question because I want this to be, a point of return conversation for my audiences. And I said, when I was up there and I got a clear line of sight on this guy, and I've got everything in the world that I have that wants me to say, go ahead and take that shot. Two reasons why I didn't take that shot. Um, I'll spare you guys, having to answer the question now, but basically the two reasons are because I know that having to answer to the brass, they're going to be like, "Well, was the guy dead? Yeah. Well, why did you decide you wanted to put another 223, 3,000, round or 3,000 feet per second round down range in a neighborhood, after the thing was all said and done?" Well, that's a bad investigative situation for me, so I decided not to take that shot. That was my secondary reason. The primary reason was answering to God because, and I say it this way, who owns vengeance? That's not for me, that's for God. And if I had taken that shot, that would have been 100% out of vengeance. And I made that decision right there on the scene. And I'm like, okay. And I struggled with that too for a long time because I did. I wanted that. I wanted that revenge shot just to freaking make a point, and I'm so glad that I didn't. Um, but I didn't, of course. And so now I'm up on this Tahoe, 12 minutes. I went back again, listened to the whole thing multiple times, timed it all out. 12 minutes I'm on this Tahoe. And during that time, I'm about 90% sure I never took a breath. I know for a fact I never blinked that whole time because I'm like, just what few muscles I got in my arms are completely exposed. And finally, I hear one of my buddies off to my right hand side. It's our SWAT guys because they called for the SWAT team when the whole thing went bad. And he's yelling my name from off to my right hand side. And he's like, "Hey, we got you, we got you." And I'm like, no, I'm kind of like the dog protecting the mom, going, "No, you're gonna have to rip me off of this dude because I'm the last line of defense." And so what I didn't know is they already had this guy covered from another angle. And so when they came up, my buddy Billy, who's a big, massive SWAT guy, comes up, literally knocks me right off my feet, because he can see that I'm lights out. I'm focused so hard that I can't even focus, right? And that's how I describe it. And how I also, because obviously with the rifle, safety catch off, finger on the trigger, which we don't do, you know, even snipers don't do that until they know for sure, and as far as I know, I don't know for sure, but whatever. I know we don't do that on the patrol rifle side, but when he knocked me, I don't know how I didn't just have an unintentional discharge and put a round down range, but luckily it didn't happen that way. So guy knocks me over, and I'm like, "Hey, Billy, SWAT guy, now I'm safe." And we went back later. I talked to him about it for hours and hours and hours, and he said something that I'll never forget in my entire life. He's like, "Hey, man, we got you. Now you're safe." And they bunkered me off the scene, and I'm like, "Oh." And then
Wow.
the first time I started to relax just slightly. Um, so let me tell one more quick part of the story, and then I'll let you guys jump in for that's part of the scene, and then I'll go to the ending. Um, so mistake number one, coming off target. Mistake number three, not retaining that magazine. But mistake number two, I touched on it briefly, but those 5 out of those 6 rounds that went through his door did just that. They went through his door. But that it was actually my number 5 round before I started going off kilter a little bit. That fifth round didn't go through the door. And for me, that's huge because that round could have been the one that made a difference between me not going home.
Mm.
And so what I explain to people when I talk about that is, yeah, I've got, and I show a picture, I tell the whole story, and I show a picture of my rifle, sexy, freaking lights out, never had a problem with it, never had a jam, nothing whatsoever with this gun. And in a 4.5 second gunfight, I've got two failures back to back. One that was induced by me, one that was induced by a failure of the vehicle itself. It's like, okay, was that really a failure? No, it's not. However, for me, if I don't train hard enough to realize that that kind of stuff can happen, and in a gunfight, it's a whole different dynamic because you're just basically you're not thinking about these kinds of things. All you want to do is put rounds down range. Um, but luckily, it worked because the other four before that fifth one actually just started peppering him right up the side of his body, and then as I got up, higher up on target and started putting rounds into the window, then I basically just, I mean, he was pretty much done. It was pretty ugly. And people ask me all the time, like, well, what was your sight picture and all this? And I've got a little optic, a little red dot on my optic, and it's not magnified. And I got this tiny little, looks like a little laser light kind of a thing. And that first volley, I didn't see anything at all. And that second volley, that freaking red light was as big as my face, and I equate that to rage. Like, oh, you just tried to kill me. Guess what? Now to get it on. Now we got to survive this whole thing. So
Yeah.
that's and basically the nutshell. That's the tactical part of the whole scene itself of came, saw, and gunfight. So anyway, I'll take a
So
break
what's
and
hap Yeah, so wow, first of all.
I was just gonna say, wow. Thank you for being willing to share that, first of all.
yeah, let me throw this out there. If I sound like I'm being candid about this, it's because I have to.
Yeah.
I've got to be able to just say it without falling down crying and these kinds of things. Not that I don't care,
Mm.
because I tell you, I've shed a tremendous amount of tears over this whole thing. But for the purposes of I've got to be able to get through it and
Yeah.
make it, you know, whatever the word is, easier for myself to get through it.
Yeah.
So
So that's the tactical side. So what's going on inside Chris after this happens? Can you walk us through your next couple days of it had to be a roller coaster ride, my friend. It had to
it
be.
was, yeah. So I'm gonna have to tell the story toward the end. So I get bunkered off the scene and I run into Joe, and you've got a picture of Joe standing on my left, and I wrap him around my arm like this, and I'm shaking him, and I'm like, hey man, we're good, and he's face right next to mine, looking right through me. I mean, he completely lights out, and I'm like, oh, okay, what's up with that, So, and I know I'm still not okay, but I didn't realize his role in this whole thing yet, of course, and I didn't learn it for quite a while. Um, so I'm shaking him, and I'm like, hey, all right, So I kind of gave him a little bit of an impact push, um, to kind of send him on his way. Oh, you know what? I did forget one part of the story. So when I left, the back of Dave's Tahoe to go around the driver's side, Joe actually went that way first. And I grabbed onto him, and I'm like, hey, dude, what are you doing? And he's fighting me. And literally, we get into a physical fight right in the driveway because he wants to go kill the driver of this car. And I'm going, hey, I mean, I'm not that sharp, but I know we're not safe yet. So walking up to this car is probably not a good idea. So we literally got into a physical fight. I pull him back, and I gave him the worst impact push ever. I mean, I just freaking launched him. Boom. I'm like, here, go be a supervisor. That's your job. I got this. Don't worry about it. So he does. So that second time when I see him, I didn't give him an impact push. I basically was kind of just nudged him. I'm like, hey, just basically trying to get him back into reality of of whatever. And so he goes on his way. I walk all the way down to the far end of the street, which is, several hundred yards down the way. And I see this kid, and I'm all, all tacked out with all my stuff, and I've been leaning on this Tahoe for however long now. When I finally get relieved, and I'm all, black from the tire and just completely disheveled. Of course, my face is probably just a disaster too. And I see this kid, and he looks like he's like first day out of the academy, like completely spit shine and pressed and everything else. And I walked over to him, and I'm like, "Hey, give me your phone." And he's basically like reaching for his gun, going, "Dude, I don't know who you are," kind of a thing. And this kid hands me his phone. I call him a kid. I still to this day don't know who he is. I'd love to be able to find him. I've searched for him, but I can't find out who it was out there. Hands me his phone, and I go to dial my at the time wife, and it looks just like this. My fingers are trembling so badly I can't even dial the phone. I handed it back to him. I said, here, dial this number for me. And this is a side note to that whole thing for anybody that's still out there. If your phone rings while your significant other is any place except for by your side, no matter what that phone is, answer the phone because it could be a stranger. And because my wife knew because she had gotten that call 5 times prior to that for me being involved in a shooting or being in the hospital or whatever it was, she knew to answer the phone, even though it came up as a strange number. She gets halfway through hello and I freaking lose it. Just, I mean, the floodgates, boom. And this poor kid, I'm like, hey, just want to let you know, I think an officer was killed. I don't know. I just want to let you know I'm okay. And now she's crying, of course. And I'm like trying to wipe off this kid's phone. It's all just nasty with, all my stuff. And I look around and there's like 5 or 6 other firefighters and cops all now they see me and now they're all crying. And I'm like, sorry guys, that wasn't my plan. I wasn't trying to turn everybody into a blubbering mess. Um, Hand the kid back his phone. I go on my way, and very significant part of the story too, because now I get assigned a critical incident stress management supervisor, as it turns out, and I start downing all my gear. Take off the helmet, take off my rifle, take off my vest, all these kinds of things. I still have my little mini Glock 30 as my backup piece, which is what I carried as plain clothes. I still have my Glock 21 in my vest, fully loaded up, got magazines for the rifle, got the rifle. I unload all that kind of stuff, hold on to the 30, and then as he's closing the tailgate of the Tahoe, I grab my Kevlar helmet, and he goes to grab it back, and I'm like, no, and I'm hanging on to it like a freaking rabbit's foot. Now, don't ask me why. Still to this day, I don't know why. Hanging on to this helmet like it's like Linus with his blanket, right? I'm like, no, you're not taking this thing away from me for whatever reason. Okay, so kind of walk sort of toward the sidewalk up on this little grassy hill, and I sit down, and everything just goes like super slow motion. Like, sit down on the grass. I lay the helmet down. I'm not like stroking it or anything, like nothing weird like that. But I pretty much got my hand resting on it. I know it sounds strange to say it this way, um, and I'm looking around, and this is what my head's pretty much doing. I'm just looking this way, and then looking back this way, back and forth, and I'm seeing all these cops showing up all over, doing their jobs, shutting down the streets and having conversations and whatever else. And the critical incident stress supervisor is basically there to make sure nobody comes around me because they don't want me talking to the press, other officers, revealing information that maybe doesn't need to be revealed yet, these kinds of things. So the only people that are allowed to come see me are chiefs, and that's it, pretty much chiefs. I mean, not even commanders or anything else. And so 3 or 4 different chiefs come walking over and they're like, hey, and I remember every single one of them, they walk over and they're crying, and they're like, oh my God, we're so glad you're okay. Of course, now I'm crying. And every time it happened, about 4 or 5 minute intervals between each chief happening to show up, I'm like, damn it, I just got myself recomposed. Now I'm crying all over again. And this just goes on and on. And so that was the very, very most beginning surreal moment when I'm going, what just happened, And that lasted for probably about 30 minutes. Um, so fast forward, go to the hospital, do all that stuff, go home. Actually, I get driven back to the precinct, drive home, and I go. I had already been separated from my ex at the time. She was still my wife, wasn't my ex yet. Um, So I go to her house, my old house, which is really strange. It's nothing stranger than knocking on the house that you bought, and like going, okay,
Yeah.
what another story. Um, but I had called her because you guys do me a favor, make sure you call me on your way home. Okay, so I do. I call her. I said, hey, about an hour away from home, still from where I worked, and I get to her house at about 3 in the morning. I spoke to her for about an hour, telling her the whole thing, and I live like half a mile away. Drive home, down on my gear, whatever's left over, which basically was like a trail up my stairs, to the bedroom. Um, got into bed at 4 o'clock in the morning and was up at 5. Slept for literally an hour. Mind
Oh.
you, the day before I was up at 4 and got in the shower and all that stuff, and I was at work at like 5:30, quarter to 6. So I've pretty much been up for more over 24 hours at this point, almost. Climbed in bed at 4, up at 5, and I spent the entire rest of the day on the phone, either with text messages or voicemails. And as it turned out, I went back and I counted them. I had 78 text messages and 25 voicemails, and not one single duplicate. And
Wow.
all day telling the story, telling the story, telling the story. Um, Another very huge part of the story was that um, most people that hang around me for any length of time realize that one of my things that is really, really bad karma for me is just saying, be careful. Why that is, I don't know. So a really close friend of mine, as I'm walking out the door to the precinct, last thing she says is, "Be careful." And I was like, kind of blew it off, right? Whatever. Get down there. She ended up being the very first text message that I got when I pulled up on the scene. So basically said the exact same thing. Be careful with a couple of hearts. Okay. So when I get through all those messages, she's the very last one that I see, and I see that message, and I'm like, well, and I start crying. I'm like, oh my god. Call her up, and I go, hey, we need to meet in person. So I met her weeks later. I said, you have to understand this part of my story now that I have one. Um, you were probably, you would have been, God forbid, things had gone worse for me. You would have been the last person to ever speak to me, at least on a text message. Of course, she starts crying. She's like, I go, I don't want you to think that that's a bad thing. I just wanted you to understand, how this has affected me. She's like, oh my God. Of course, big hugs and everything else. But these are the little things that you don't pay attention to until a major critical incident slaps you upside the head. And you're like, hey, I need to start paying attention to these things for whatever your particular reasons are. So, um, got into bed about 10 o'clock that next night, and I slept, as good as I could, I guess. I actually slept through the night, which is pretty unusual even without a critical incident for me. So, um, next few days were pretty much just in a fog, back on the phone. Um, I went back and forth because it was May in Phoenix, which is hot. So I was back and forth to the pool, just, trying to cool myself down, trying to just get some perspective, um, trying to replay the incident in my head and what could I do? What could I change? All these kinds of things. And so, fast forward again, it was about 5 days later, I decided to make a trek down to just face all the stuff, right? Whatever that is. Turned out it was way too much for me to do at that one particular time.
Mm.
First place I went to was back to the station. And this is 5 days later. So um, pull in the parking lot, and the very first thing I see is Dave's Tahoe. And I'm like, oh, you know. And I only knew that because I drove that car for 3 years before they surplused it to his squad. So I knew that car. I mean, that was my favorite patrol car I ever had. And I see the car and I see, the carnage that's been created on this thing. And I'm like, oh. So, of course, I kind of go, if you will, pay my respects on some level, go in, have like a several hour conversation with the sergeant that relieved all of us running the scene for the rest of the night before he got relieved. We were out there for almost 2 full days, taking care of this whole scene. And then I left there and I went down to the academy because I knew that internal affairs had a gun for me that I was going to have to carry as a secondary now because my gun's been impounded for evidentiary purposes. And spare the details on that was just kind of a mess anyways. But I'm up there. We're probably at least 40 yards away up on in the parking lot part of the range. I see guys loading magazines. I don't know who they are. They don't have a clue who I am, of course. I'm talking to one of my really close friends down at the academy. And all of a sudden they're okay, we're going hot, which again, I've been on the range for 20 years at this point almost, so this is not something new for me. And I hear that, I'm like, okay, we're so far away, I don't even need ear protection at this point. And that first shot goes off, and I jumped about 8 feet and just turned ghost white.
Mm.
And my buddy saw that, and he's like, hey, and he put both his hands on my shoulders. He's like, hey, man, you good? Yeah, man, no, whatever, get out of here, I'm fine. Blow it off like we do. And that was the first time I realized that I was not okay. I'm like, wait a second. And I started trying to figure out, had there been more shots fired at me, would that have kind of made it easier for me to hear shots going off? Or was it because there were so few that it pushed my brain in a different kind of direction? These are those kinds of questions that you ask yourself. You're like, well, maybe if I got shot at more, I could handle it better. Well, I mean, how are you ever going to answer that, right? I mean, you don't know.
Right.
But these are things that creep into your brain, right? So, um, so I was fine with that whole thing. Um, I lied. Actually, I went to the station first. Then I went to the scene, walked around there for 20 minutes or so in cement, by the way, because I was like, ugh, couldn't really move. And going, it was just very strange. Then went down to the academy. Left there, went over to headquarters for I don't even remember why I went over there for something else. And then I went to the rifle range, which is on the other side of town, pretty much. And by the time I got to the rifle range, it's close to the end of the day. It's probably pushing 3 o'clock, and I left my house at probably 7 or 8 that morning. And by the time I got to the range, which is actually closer to where I lived, it was more just kind of an impromptu. While I'm driving by, I'm just going to pull in just to see kind of a thing, and kind of on the way home. By that time, I was just exhausted. I was like, yeah, I don't even know why I'm doing this. Um, but I know a lot of people wanted to hear the story, what happened, and because cops like the worst of the rumor mills. Um, got home, and then it just all kind of fell into place later on down the way. I mean, there's really not much else I had responsibility wise that I had to do except for just wait for the brass to tell me to go start seeing a psychiatrist and all that kind of stuff. So sure, there's got to be some questions in the middle of all that whole mess. So
Man, first of all, I'm glad you're okay. I'm glad you survived it. Number one, like,
thanks.
I'm
Uh,
that's quite a powerful story.
Mhm.
no easy
Sorry.
task. No easy task. So
Yeah, go ahead. I can tell you want to say something.
So I have a couple of questions, just to gain perspective, of where you were at mentally at that time. So you'd mentioned a couple of times, you used the words lights out and like then a physical sensation to come back to reality. Can you describe what you felt or didn't feel, in your own words, when you say lights out? What are you referring to?
well, on the scene itself, I was it was one of those things where, we talk about it all the time where your training kicks in. Well,
Hmm.
that's absolutely true. And that's exactly what happened to me, where my brain doesn't even allow me to think about what's going on. It just does. It's like, okay, we're
Hmm.
just going to go back to that, what we've been doing, what we've been doing, what we've been doing. And that's where that was. On a emotional or personal side of things, lights out for me basically was me going to my safe place, as it turns out, which I didn't even realize was even a thing, right? When I see Joe and he's looking right at me, and I'm like, that doesn't look right, and my brain won't allow me to process that. Okay, this didn't really happen, so we're gonna go over here and we're gonna be in a nice big soft field someplace or someplace, safe or whatever.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then sitting on the grass, literally with my helmet, same kind of a thing. I'm lights out there again because I'm going, okay, I know I've got all my fingers and toes. I've inspected my helmet. I know I don't have any bullet holes in me. I think I'm okay. But again, my brain was like, yeah, you're not quite ready to take on the next whatever that happens to be. So we're gonna just make you just visualize. So my brain just kind of shuts down on some level and says, we'll let you know when we're ready, kind of a thing, and that's kind of what that refers to, if that makes sense. So
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, absolutely.
Can I ask you just a question, friend? Were you, because I know you're a believer in Christ now, were you a believer back then, or where were you in your journey with God, or did you have one?
that might be the biggest question of this session right here, as a matter of fact. So
Mm.
most of my life I had been, religion had been thrown at me,
Me. Yep.
this and this and this, and I very much turned away from it like a lot of kids do my age, 12, 13, and you need to give yourself away. And I'm like, I want to go ride my bike. I mean, that was my priority at the time. You know, I had several friends that were very spiritual, and I didn't know the difference at the time. And I started learning about certain things mostly after Dave, but I had learned a few things that were that got me curious enough to start looking into it more. I'm going, okay, but not enough to make that transition to start that relationship with God, if you will.
Yep.
And so my very ignorant concept was at the time, most of my adult life was, well, when God shows me a sign, then I'll believe.
Mm.
Yep.
And after Dave, after that whole scene, that was the sign. And then I started going, yeah, kid, well, you asked for it. Here you go. It's like, ugh. And so clearly after that, um, not only surviving the whole thing, but knowing how Dave led his life and his
Yep.
family and everything else, I was just pretty much because of him, I was so incredibly inspired by his lifestyle that I was like, and I didn't commit because of that, but that pushed me into the curiosity factor of I need to do more, research on this thing, if you will, and figure out how he got to that point where he was at such a young age, and I don't even know what it was, 8 or 10 or 12 years older than he was. And I'm like, he's been doing this for most of his life. I've got over a decade on this guy, and I'm still not there. What am I doing wrong here? So uh, started looking into it, and I started realizing I'm like, wow, you know, and noticing things that I never noticed before, and it was like, okay, stuff like I think I may have told you guys a story. I took Natalie back down to the scene before she finished the book with me, and crazy windy that day down in South Phoenix, and there were flower petals being blown all over the place. It was very very strange. Okay, whatever. I'm just down there explaining it to her because I want her to see visually what it actually looks like, and so she got a better concept of when she's reliving the story in the context of the book, she can actually picture it in her mind, kind of a thing. Um, so all of a sudden we're down there, and I'm telling her what's going on, and bigger than life. I swear, the strangest thing: 6 rose petals, to be specific, rose petals, not related to the other flowers, came and landed right where Dave had fallen and didn't move, even though there were all this other stuff blowing
Wow.
all around us. They stayed right there, and I was like, that if that's not a God moment, I mean, come on. I mean, that's
Right. Wow.
so. That was one of several of those occurrences that's happened, and I absolutely take it on board. And I'm like, yes, thank you. I know with those kind of things that Dave's okay. You know what I mean? So
Yep.
Yeah.
And if you don't mind, let's honor Dave a little bit. Dave was not only an amazing cop, he was an amazing follower of Christ, and he truly. I read in your book he had a very good relationship with Jesus. And Chris, do you mind talking a little bit about what kind of you learned more about David, or what you already knew about him at the time? And then I know you
yeah,
guys had the funeral, but he was a very godly man. Is that correct?
he was huge, big time. Oh yeah. I credit that to probably his parents because his parents they're close friends of mine and Natalie's now, which is fantastic. So, and it's kind of a hard relationship because, of course, I mean, we were out there doing this whole thing, and even though it's been several years, and even though I've mostly let it go, I do feel some level of responsibility that Dave died on my watch. You know what I mean? So, um, his parents have absolutely forgiven the bad guy. They've allowed me to be part of their family, be in their hearts and everything else, which is for me just unbelievably huge. Um, so I think I give those guys a lot of credit for his upbringing and so forth. And his sister, she's still around, um, which is great. She didn't get to come see us the last time we got to see them, um, but she's still out and about and doing her thing, which is great. So, um, but Dave himself, big huge sports fan, was always at the football games and doing tailgate parties and these kinds of things. But the greatest thing about Dave, besides just his basic spirituality part of it, because he wasn't one of those guys that would, you know, start preaching and trying to get people to be like he wanted them to be. He would just be who he was, and it was infectious. And it was like, okay. And the reason I say it that way is because the first time I ever heard him say the words to me that I love you, I'm like, I don't even know you, man. I mean, just stay on your side of the room, bro. I mean, that's kind of how it was. Um, but that's his thing. That's what he told people. He's like, hey, you got to tell everybody, hey, I love you. You know, and he did on a regular basis. And I swear, after his passing, it became absolutely infectious within my department. It was fantastic.
Wow.
I mean, I'd be seeing stickers all over the place. Going, there's a sticker on the inside of one of the jail cells in one of the precincts downtown. I don't even work at. I'm like, how'd that happen? It's like, man, just
Wow.
stuff like that. So, um, and I think the biggest attribute to his existence, if you will, was he truly was ready to give up his life for me and for his friends and for his family, which I still can't wrap my head around. I've gotten past the fear of death, but I still can't get to the level that he was, which is just I'm like, I mean, he was, as far as I was concerned, he was a kid. I mean, who does that? It's like, oh my
Right.
god, you know, and it's unbelievable. So the the admiration I have for him and for his his widow and his kids is just as it's just unmeasurable. Really, I gotta say. So
What a blessing his life
unbelievable.
was to everybody.
It was. It still is. I mean, they've got the Dave Glasser Foundation. I've got obviously Dave Glasser shirts and hats, and you can't see it, but behind me I've got his EOW pin that's attached to the medal that I got. Oh, and I wear for his EOW pin, I wear that as my tie pin whenever I go out someplace, and
Mm.
I always wear it on my shirt if I'm teaching a class or whatever else, and people recognize that. They're like, oh hey, hey, this is my symbol. This is my way of hanging on. But I do have a kind of a great little side story to the whole thing too. So years and years ago, I decided I want to go get a tattoo, but I didn't know what I wanted. And my artist was like, "Hey, make sure that it's something that you want to have on your body for the rest of your life." Okay, blah blah blah. And I don't have much of a canvas, especially on my arms. Um, so what I wanted was a going back to my youngest. He's 22 now. He's like, "Hey, you should probably get your favorite spirit animal," which for me is a great white shark. Don't ask me why.
Mm.
Grew up in the ocean, that's kind of a thing. So that was my thing. And so talking to my artist, and she goes, "Well, find about 8 or 10 things that are really meaningful to you. Write them down, and we'll figure out a way to incorporate those things." And I'm going, oh, "Okay, cool. That sounds like a thing." So she sends me this design, and I'm like, I was just absolutely completely blown away. But the idea, what I wanted was, I wanted like the tail on my arm here, and then the body on my on my rib cage. So when I put them together, it kind of made one. It was going to be
Mm.
like a separate design here and a separate design here. And she's like, "Well, that's a great idea, except for you're skinny little whatever. So just maybe try something better." So when you read the book, you'll understand the rest of that phrase. So whatever. So um, and so she goes, "Well, instead of having it together," she goes, "Why don't we just put it all just on one side of your body?" And she goes, in respect for Dave, why don't we? Because the entire thing is all black, the entire thing, except for where we joined the tail to the body. And now Dave Glasser's serial number is what joins the two together. And
Wow.
Mm.
I don't know if you guys can be able to see it, but I've actually got it right here.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
so I've
Yeah,
actually
that is cool.
right down my side, but it's got 10 of my, or actually 9 of my favorite things. Like, it's got my kids' names in the tail, my rifle, Dave's serial number, got the American flag and the Twin Towers. I got my favorite airplane, my motorcycle, and then my Phoenix PD serial number, all in the. It's like a tribal style
That's
thing,
so cool.
That
but
is
that was
so
another
cool.
great way for me to just dedicate part of my life to Dave as well. Just having something permanently attached to my body that represents him too. So
Yeah.
Absolutely.
yeah,
That's
so
beautiful.
Wow.
yeah,
I do have another question, if you don't mind. W-
absolutely, of course.
What has been the greatest source of healing for you through all of this?
Man, there's several. Um,
Okay, yeah.
I don't limit it to just one or two,
Yep.
Okay.
because having these conversations is huge. It
Oh,
is
okay.
for me to share the story, share Dave's legacy, share what I went through and how I came out of it the other side for the most part.
Mhm.
That's huge. Doing my presentation, um, specifically for first responders, anybody that may have been through or survived a critical incident, is huge. Natalie says over and over that probably, in her opinion, the number one thing that saved my life was writing the book. And
Oh.
so
Love
highly,
that.
highly, highly encourage everybody. I had a guy a couple days ago, same exact thing. He's like, "Yeah, I was thinking about doing it." I go, "Look, man, you got to look at it from a different perspective of, I want to write a book. Don't look at it from that angle. Look at it as you're just writing whatever it is on paper, on your laptop, dictate it into your phone. I don't care. If it ever makes it to print, great. If it does, cool. Yeah, you can have something in your hand. You can hand off to your kids. But if it doesn't, that's still all this release that you're getting off your chest, out of your brain, off your body, that can be now somewhere, you know, physically on paper or wherever else, and you can go back anytime you want to. Now, if you do decide to take it to the next level, have it edited, published, and all that great stuff, that's all fine and great too. That's kind of the icing on the cake. But the purpose of this whole thing is to share your story with yourself,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
allows you a whole bunch of different things. It allows you to release a lot of stuff, relive a lot of those memories, and you can take out. Believe me when I tell you, especially on a keyboard, you can take out a lot of anger while you're typing. You're like, this
Yes.
stuff, and it's incredibly therapeutic. It is, and I tell people all the time. Also, look, if you decide to embark on this venture, which it is, don't try to. I got a really brand new friend out of Florida now, and he's a genius. The guy's a rock star. He's been through a tremendous amount of stuff in his career, and he's like, yeah, I'm gonna, next week I'm gonna sit down. I'm like, no, 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 no. Let me just correct you on that. Don't set times when you're gonna go sit down and write, because I would pretty much guarantee it's not gonna come. It's just
Mhm.
not. When you're feeling inspired, whatever you're doing, again, we've all got our stupid phones. Get on there, hey Siri, just dictate something in your phone. Type yourself a text message. You can just put a topic on what it is. Hey, that Washington D.C. story. Okay, and then you'll go back and remember that later. Then you can actually type it out and whatever else. So that's my recommendation to folks. So.
I like that.
That's really good. Yeah.
It's something that I felt God kind of tell us early on that there would be a book or several books that come out of this organization.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, just got a guy that reached out last week that was talking about me writing a book. I don't know that I'm there yet, but
Yeah.
that's something I want to do sometime. But honestly, Chris, it's a fear of mine because again, I'm a bad writer and bad speaker. But I also realize that that's what editors are for, and that if I can just get
You'd
it
be
down on
surprised.
paper,
Because I wouldn't consider myself a writer. I mean, I can write. Well, I joke about I can't write reports, but I can write a book. But I mean, the fact of the matter is, yeah, that's what we do. We write reports, right?
yep,
And I can promise you that as long as it's coming from the heart, even if you don't get the feedback that you think, who cares? It's your stuff,
that's it.
100% for you. And clearly, Christina's going to get a copy of it. She'll read it, she'll critique it for you,
Yeah.
and you know, Natalie's writing a book for a really good friend of ours back in New Jersey, and he's got some stories in there that are just, I mean, in any other context would just completely inappropriate. But that's what his job was, and he was really worried. In fact, yesterday, he told us that she was finally able to read the part of the manuscript, and he was terrified that she was going to probably just leave him outright. He goes, after she read that, we had a couple conversations as to why, everything else. He goes, now our marriage has never been stronger. I'm like, dude, all
Wow.
this
Love
because he
it.
wanted to start putting the stuff down on paper. Unbelievable.
Wow.
So he may have just saved his marriage. Not that he's having a bad marriage, but they just grew even closer, which is like, holy cow, oh my god. I mean, it's another gift, right? So
Yes,
Yeah.
you know,
I love
so
that.
That's a
yeah,
good point that I just want to touch on really quick because that's something that, Daniel and I have come across a lot as we talk to people and learn more. Marriages in law enforcement and the first responder world um, don't do so hot usually, like not a good track record. But
unfortunately,
you shared that there was a lot of positive growth from sharing those difficult things, and I know that in our relationship it was huge when you were able to share the most difficult things, the heaviest things that you were hiding and keeping to yourself and just carrying all alone, when you were able to just finally share that.
You were the first person I ever told. I didn't tell
Yeah.
my last wife. I didn't tell
Yeah.
anybody. So you're the first one, and getting that out there, it was literally like chains falling off of me.
Mhm.
And then every time after that, that I got to tell my story to somebody else or to
Mm.
just get a chance to share it, it was like chains falling off. Just weight
absolutely.
of everything I was holding in.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's magical. That's
Mhm.
why I like the podcast that we do. Right, it continues to do that. It gives us a voice, gives people a voice
Yeah.
to be able to do that. Absolutely.
And just thank you so much for sharing everything that you have and being so open and candid about it. Honestly, I really value that you've approached it in that tone. I think that that sets a really good example for everybody to, just be open, honest, and this is how it is. And so just thank you so much for that and all of the time that you've spent with us.
Yes.
Thank you so much for that. And we'll be sure in this episode to include Chris's contact information again. Again, a link to his book. That way you can easily just get that ordered and give it a read. We definitely recommend. And anything else you want to add?
Nope. Just
No?
thank you, Chris. I'll be
Yeah.
talking to you. Um,
Yeah.
I consider you a friend, and I'll be talking to you shortly. But thanks for joining us for these 3 episodes and
Hmm.
giving up your time. And thank Natalie for letting you have the time to do this while she's out enjoying the beach.
Well, she just
And
came back, so I guess she had enough. So, and
we'll
I
make
know
sure
it's
you
fun down there with you guys as well to share her story, which is even
Awesome.
like better than mine.
yes. And I still want to do that. And I got her book sitting right here because I
Oh,
want
yeah,
to.
perfect. Yeah. So,
Yep. I want to set up a time to do an episode with her to talk about her book because I just love her heart. But
yeah,
make
Yeah.
sure you give us a hug from us and tell her that we look forward to hopefully seeing her in person over the summer.
I guarantee it's going to happen one way or the other. Well, we got to
Heck yeah.
drag you guys out here by your coattails or whatever. So,
You got it, brother. Well,
Deal.
thank you. And if you want to go ahead and close this out, Chris, thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll catch you in the next episode.